Hey, welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy tonight's stories. Here we venture into the dark web, peeling back layers of mystery and terror to reveal tales that were never meant to be told. Leave a like and subscribe for more dark web scary stories. I was hired to transport a specimen for a secret government lab. The specimen escaped. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't even looking for work. I was just scrolling through some forums late at night, bored out of my mind, when I came across the ad. It wasn't on a job board or even anything remotely official. It was buried in a thread about obscure gigs. The post read, "Seeking discreet driver for sensitive transport. High pay. One night only. DM for details." I don't know why I clicked on it. Maybe it was the promise of high pay, or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, I sent a message. I wasn't expecting a reply, but 10 minutes later, my inbox pinged. The response was short and to the point. They needed someone to drive a package from point A to point B. No questions, no stops, no contact with anyone along the way. The job paid $5,000 in cash. $5,000 for one night. It sounded too good to be true, but rent was overdue. My fridge was basically empty, so I replied. They sent me an address and told me to show up at midnight. The address was out in the middle of nowhere, about an hour's drive from where I lived. It was one of those roads where your GPS signal cuts out, and the only light comes from your headlights. The building itself was nondescript, a squat, grey structure with no windows and a single metal door. I parked out front and was about to knock when the door opened on its own. A man in a lab coat stepped out, his face partially hidden behind a surgical mask. "You're the driver?" he asked, his voice muffled. I nodded. "Follow me." Inside, the air was cold, sterile, like a hospital. The man led me down a long hallway to a room with a reinforced steel door. He opened it with a key card and motioned for me to stay outside while he stepped in. I caught a glimpse of what was inside, metal cages, strange equipment, and a faint, low hum that set my teeth on edge. When he came back out, he was pushing a metal crate on a dolly. The crate was about the size of a large cooler, covered in warning labels I didn't recognize. The only one I could read said, "Handle with extreme caution." He slid the crate into the back of my car and handed me an envelope. "Your payment," he said. "The rest will be wired to you once the job is done." "What's in the crate?" I asked, immediately regretting it. The man's eyes narrowed. "You don't need to know. Just stick to the route and make sure it gets there." He handed me a piece of paper with instructions. It wasn't much, just a list of turns and a final address. No GPS, no highway, just back roads and small towns. "Keep the AC on high," he added as I got into the car. "And whatever you do, don't open the crate." He didn't wait for me to respond. The door slammed shut behind him, and I was left alone in the dark with $5,000 in cash and a mystery box in the back seat. The first hour of the drive was uneventful. The roads were quiet, the kind of empty that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but there was nothing, just darkness. The crate made a soft, rhythmic hum, like there was a fan running inside. I told myself it was just some high-tech cooling system. Whatever was in there, it probably needed to be kept cold. But every so often I thought I heard something else. A faint, clicking sound, almost like nails tapping against metal. I turned the radio on to drown it out, but the static only made it worse. The directions took me deeper into the woods, the roads narrowing until they were barely wide enough for my car. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching over the road like skeletal fingers. The crate was getting louder now, the hum vibrating through the car, and that clicking sound was more distinct. It wasn't my imagination. Something was moving inside the crate. I glanced at it in the rearview mirror, my stomach tightening. "Don't open the crate," the man had said. But what if something was wrong? What if it needed, I don't know, help? I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine idling as I stared at the crate. The clicking had stopped, replaced by a low, steady thumping, like something inside was shifting. "Just take a look," I muttered to myself. "Make sure it's secure." The moment I unbuckled my seatbelt, the thumping stopped. Dead silence. My hand froze on the door handle, my heart pounding. The crate sat there, still and quiet, like it was waiting for me to make the first move. I shook my head and slammed the car into drive. "Nope, not doing this." As I sped down the road, the crate began to hum again, louder this time. I cranked up the AC like the man had told me, but it didn't help. The clicking came back, faster and more frantic, like whatever was inside was trying to get out. And then I heard it. A low growl that sent chills down my spine. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me, nearly making me swerve off the road. I grabbed it without thinking, my eyes flicking between the screen and the road. Unknown number. "You're off route. Get back on track." My stomach dropped. How did they know? There was no tracker in the car, no GPS. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. The phone buzzed again. "Do not stop. Do not check the crate." I looked at the crate in the rear-view mirror. The clicking had turned into scraping, like claws dragging against the inside of the metal. I floored it, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The road narrowed even more, the trees pressing in until it felt like they were swallowing the car. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the crate was rattling now, the sound echoing through the car. And then it stopped. The silence was so sudden it made my ears ring. The crate wasn't humming, clicking or scraping anymore. It was completely still. For a moment I thought maybe whatever was inside had gone dormant. Maybe I'd hit a bump and knocked it unconscious. But then I smelled it, a sharp, metallic scent, like copper mixed with something sour. It filled the car, making my eyes water. I didn't want to look, but my eyes were drawn to the rear-view mirror. The crate was glowing faintly, a sickly green light seeping through the seams. And then I heard it again, the growl, but this time it was coming from right behind me. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. That growl was low, guttural, like something you'd hear from an animal too big to exist. It wasn't just behind me, it was in the back seat, right where I'd left the crate. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. My first instinct was to slam the brakes and jump out of the car. But then what? Run into the woods and hope for the best? Call for help? I doubted 911 had a protocol for mystery creature in a government crate. So I did the only thing I could. I kept driving. The crate stayed silent for a few minutes, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the sound. Almost. But then the rattling started. It was soft at first, like something shifting inside, but it grew louder, more forceful, until the entire car shook with each thud. I adjusted the rear-view mirror, trying to see what was happening without actually turning around. The glow I'd noticed earlier was back, faint, pulsing, like the crate had a heartbeat. It wasn't just glowing, though. The seams of the metal were bending outward, warping under pressure. And then the crate moved. It slid across the back seat with a loud metallic scrape, slamming into the door. I swerved, my heart racing, and barely managed to keep the car on the road. The crate thudded again, harder this time, as if something inside was throwing itself against the walls. "Stay together," I muttered under my breath. "Just stay together." I floored it, the trees whipping past in a blur. The air inside the car felt wrong, thick, oppressive, like it was pushing down on me. The rattling turned into pounding, each hit more violent than the last, and then, with a sound like a gunshot, one of the crate's hinges snapped. My stomach dropped. The top of the crate was slightly open now, just enough to let out a sliver of green light. Something inside shifted, and for a split second I thought I saw movement, a shadow too big for the space it was in. I reached for my phone, desperate for answers, but before I could grab it, the screen lit up on its own. Unknown number. Keep driving. As if I had any other choice. The crate rattled again, harder this time, and I could hear something. Breathing. Deep, laboured breaths like whatever was inside had finally woken up. I pushed the car to its limit, my eyes darting between the road and the rear-view mirror. The crate's glow grew brighter, casting eerie green light across the back seat. I could see the straps they'd used to secure it. They were shredded, dangling uselessly. The breathing grew louder, almost a growl, and then a voice. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It was deep and layered, like multiple people speaking at once. The words didn't make sense at first, just guttural sounds that clawed at the edges of my mind. But then, clear as day, I heard it. "Stop the car!" My foot slammed on the brake without thinking. The car skidded to a stop, the tires screeching against the gravel road. The crate lurched forward, slamming into the back of the front seats. For a moment, everything was still. Quiet. And then the crate burst open. I didn't see what came out. I didn't want to. The moment the crate cracked open, the light in the car surged, blinding me. It wasn't just green anymore. It was every color at once, swirling and pulsing in ways that didn't make sense. I shielded my eyes, my breath catching as the air grew colder. The light dimmed after a few seconds, just enough for me to lower my hand. My heart stopped. The back seat was empty. I turned around slowly, every muscle in my body tense. The crate was torn apart, its metal sides bent outward like they'd been peeled open from the inside. But there was no creature, no glowing light, just a black, viscous substance dripping from the edges. And then I heard it, a scraping sound coming from the roof of the car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the roof. The sound moved, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging against metal. Whatever was up there wasn't in a hurry. It wanted me to know it was there. I threw the car into gear, slamming my foot on the gas. The tires spun for a moment before catching, and the car lurched forward. The scraping stopped, replaced by a heavy thud as the weight on the roof shifted. I drove as fast as I could, the trees blurring into a dark tunnel around me. The road was narrow, twisting, and every turn felt like it might send me flying into the woods, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature chasing me. Instead, I saw my own reflection, or at least I thought it was my reflection. My eyes were glowing. Not fully, just faintly, like there was a light flickering behind them. I blinked, shaking my head, and the glow was gone. But the image stayed burned in my mind. I didn't have time to process it. Up ahead, the road split into two paths. The directions I'd been given were on the passenger seat, but I couldn't risk looking at them. I picked a direction at random and turned, the car skidding as I struggled to stay on the road. The scraping started again. This time, it wasn't on the roof. It was inside the car. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was back there. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The air in the car felt heavy, suffocating, and the faint sound of breathing filled the space around me. And then a hand rested on my shoulder. It was cold, too cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, that makes your skin crawl. "Stop," the voice said again, so close to my ear it felt like it was inside my head. I swerved, the car lurching as I tried to shake off whatever was behind me. The hand slipped away, and for a moment, the car was quiet again. But in the rear-view mirror, something moved, and it was smiling. I didn't want to believe what I'd seen. My mind raced with excuses. It was a trick of the light. I was imagining things. Maybe the stress was making me see things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever had been in that crate wasn't just loose, it was inside the car. The smile I'd glimpsed in the rearview mirror wasn't human. It was wide, too wide, stretching across a face that didn't seem to have bones, just a shifting mass of shadow and faint green light. The moment our eyes met, I felt it, like cold fingers running through my thoughts, rifling through my memories. It knew me. I didn't stop driving, I couldn't. The road was endless, winding deeper into the forest, the trees pressing in like they were trying to keep me there. The sound of breathing filled the car again, louder this time, and with it came a faint whisper. It wasn't words exactly, more like an impression, a feeling that I couldn't shake. Why run? My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look in the mirror again. But then the whisper turned into laughter, low and guttural, like it was trying to mimic something human and failing miserably. It was everywhere, filling the car, pressing against my skull. And then it spoke. "Do you know what you're carrying?" The voice wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from the passenger seat. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my eyes on the road, to pretend I didn't hear it. But the car felt smaller, the air thicker, and the laughter grew louder, like it was daring me to acknowledge it. Slowly, against my better judgment, I turned my head. The passenger seat was empty, but there was something sitting just behind it, leaning forward, its head tilted in that unnatural way that made my stomach churn. It wasn't fully visible, just a silhouette, a suggestion of a shape that didn't belong in this world. Its eyes glowed faintly, the same sickly green as the crate, and its mouth twisted into that too wide smile. "You don't even know what they sent with you, do you?" it asked, its voice dripping with mockery. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was dry, my chest tight, and every fibre of my being screamed at me to keep driving, to pretend it wasn't there. But it wasn't going to let me ignore it. "They didn't tell you," it continued, leaning closer. "They don't care about you. You're nothing but a delivery boy, disposable." I glanced at the rearview mirror, hoping it would be gone, but its reflection wasn't there. That somehow made it worse, like it wasn't just in the car, but in my head, taking up space where it didn't belong. "What do you want?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. It laughed again, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the car. "Want? Oh, I don't want anything from you. You've already done enough just by letting me out." The road ahead stretched into darkness, and I realized I didn't even know where I was anymore. The directions I'd been given were useless now. I'd veered off course miles ago, and my GPS had stopped working long before that. I was driving blind, with only the faint beams of my headlights to guide me. The thing in the back seat seemed to sense my panic. "You're wondering what happens next," it said, almost playfully. "You're hoping there's a way out." It leaned closer, and for the first time I saw its hand, a long skeletal thing with too many joints, its skin blackened and cracked. It reached toward my shoulder, and I flinched, nearly swerving off the road. "But there's no escape," it whispered, its voice almost gentle. "Not for you." The lights in the car flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. When they came back on, the creature was gone. The passenger seat was empty, and the crate in the back seat was completely destroyed, its twisted remains dripping with that black, viscous substance. But the sense of relief didn't last. The car began to shake, the engine sputtering like it was struggling to stay alive. I pressed harder on the gas, but it didn't respond. The headlights dimmed, and the road in front of me seemed to dissolve into shadow. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing all around me. "You were never supposed to make it to the drop-off," the voice said, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "They sent you because they knew you wouldn't ask questions, and now you're mine." The car came to a sudden, violent stop, throwing me forward against the steering wheel. The engine died, the lights went out, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, desperate to get out, to run, to do anything but stay in that suffocating space. But when I opened the door, I realized I wasn't on the road anymore. I was standing in a clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The air was cold, heavy, and the ground beneath my feet was soft, almost spongy, like it wasn't entirely solid. Behind me, the car was gone. There was no sign of it, no sign of the crate, no sign of anything except me in the darkness. And then I heard it, the growl. It was deeper now, louder, vibrating through the ground and into my chest. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw something moving between the trees. It wasn't the creature from the car, it was bigger, more monstrous, its body shifting and twisting like it couldn't decide what form to take. The thing in the car had been right. I didn't know what I was carrying. I didn't know what they'd sent me to transport. But now I knew the truth. It wasn't something that could be contained, and it wasn't going to let me leave. The thing in the trees moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. It didn't walk or crawl, it rippled, shifting in and out of focus like my eyes couldn't fully comprehend it. Every time I thought I understood its shape, it changed, elongating, shrinking, bending in ways that made my stomach churn. I took a step back, my foot sinking into the spongy ground. The growl deepened, vibrating through the clearing, and I realized it wasn't just a sound. It was inside my head, a guttural warning that made my thoughts scatter like leaves in a storm. It was watching me. I tried to move slowly, carefully, but the ground shifted beneath my feet, pulling at me like it was alive. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. My first instinct was to run, but where? The clearing was surrounded by trees that looked endless, their branches intertwining like a cage. The growl turned into a low, rhythmic sound, almost like laughter. It knew I had nowhere to go. The creature, or whatever it was, stopped moving, its form solidifying for the first time. It was massive, its body stretching taller than the trees around it. Its skin was a deep, inky black that seemed to absorb the faint light from the clearing, and its eyes were the only part of it that stayed constant. Two glowing green orbs, piercing and unblinking, locked onto me with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "Why did you stop?" The voice from earlier echoed around me, smooth and mocking. It wasn't coming from the creature this time, it was coming from everywhere. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice, but it was useless. The clearing itself seemed to hum with it, like the air was alive. "You were doing so well," it continued. "Following orders, staying quiet. But you had to know, didn't you? You had to look." I didn't respond. My mouth was too dry to form words, and even if I could speak, what was I supposed to say? That I didn't mean to, that I'd only taken the job because I was desperate? I doubted it cared. The creature tilted its head, those glowing eyes narrowing. It took a step forward, the ground trembling beneath its weight. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something hard. When I looked down, my stomach turned. It was the remains of the crate. The metal was twisted and torn, its edges dripping with the same black substance I'd seen in the car. But now it wasn't just dripping, it was spreading. The liquid seeped into the ground, pulsing like it had a heartbeat, and the earth beneath it seemed to wither, turning black and brittle. The voice laughed again, softer this time. "They thought they could contain it. They thought they could control me." The creature took another step forward, its form shifting again, more fluid now. It stretched one of its limbs, long, spindly, and ending in jagged claws, and pointed at me. "But you gave me freedom." I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to. My instincts finally kicked in, and I turned to run, but the ground buckled beneath me, sending me sprawling. The air was thick now, heavy with the stench of decay. Every breath felt like I was inhaling ash. When I looked up, the creature was closer. Too close. Its eyes bore into mine, and for a moment I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could feel was the weight of it, pressing down on me, sifting through my thoughts like pages in a book. "You're afraid," it said, almost thoughtfully. "Good. Fear is useful. It keeps you alive. For now." The black substance reached me then, curling around my ankles like living shadows. It was cold, burning cold, and it seeped through my skin, crawling up my legs. I tried to scream, but the sound got caught in my throat. "Don't fight it," the voice said, soothing and cruel all at once. "You were chosen for a reason." "What do you want from me?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice trembling. The creature tilted its head again, almost like it was amused. "Want? I don't want anything. You're already part of this. Part of me." The black substance surged, pulling me down into the earth. My hands clawed at the ground, but it crumbled beneath my fingers, leaving nothing to hold on to. The creature loomed over me, its form twisting and fracturing into a kaleidoscope of shapes and shadows. As I sank deeper, memories flooded my mind. Not mine, someone else's. Flashes of sterile labs, men in suits, rooms filled with machines that hummed with unnatural energy. And always the crate. It wasn't just a container, it was a prison. A desperate attempt to lock something away, something they didn't understand, something they couldn't control. And now it was free. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me completely was the creature's face, or what it had become. It wasn't smiling anymore. Its expression was blank, empty, but its eyes, those glowing green eyes, burned with something ancient and endless. "Phase 1 is complete," the voice whispered, fading into the void. When I woke up, I was back in the car. The engine was off, the headlights dim, and the crate was gone. The only evidence it had ever been there was a faint green stain on the back seat, pulsing faintly like it was alive. I sat there for a long time, staring at the road ahead. The directions were still on the passenger seat, but the final address was missing. In its place, scrawled in jagged black letters, was a single word: soon. I don't know how I got back home that night. The drive was a blur, and when I finally stumbled through my front door, I felt different, changed. The air in my apartment was thick, suffocating, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw it again, that faint green glow in my eyes. Whatever had been in that crate wasn't just loose. It was inside me now. I didn't leave my apartment for days. Every time I looked at my reflection, I saw it, the faint green flicker in my eye. It wasn't constant, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that whatever had escaped that crate wasn't gone. It was waiting. The strange part? I didn't feel sick or weak. I felt fine. Better than fine, actually. My senses were sharper, my thoughts clearer. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the soft rustle of leaves outside my window. My skin tingled with energy, like I'd been plugged into some invisible current. But the whispers were always there. Soft at first. Faint suggestions at the edges of my thoughts, then louder, more insistent. They didn't use words, not exactly. It was more like impressions, emotions forced into my brain. And every time I ignored them, that flicker of green in my eyes burned brighter. On the fourth night, I woke up to a sound in the kitchen, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers against the countertop. My heart pounded as I slid out of bed, my feet silent on the floor. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a wrench I'd left on my desk, and crept toward the noise. The tapping stopped the second I entered the kitchen. The room was dark, but I could feel something there, a presence that made the air feel heavier. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I gripped the wrench tighter. "Don't be afraid," a voice said from the shadows. It wasn't the mocking, layered voice from before. This one was soft, almost soothing, but it was wrong. Too calm, too deliberate. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. The voice chuckled, and I swear I felt it inside my chest. "You know who I am." I flicked on the light, and for a moment I thought the kitchen was empty. But then I saw it. My reflection in the dark window over the sink. Only, it wasn't my reflection. The figure in the glass was me, but not me. Its eyes glowed brighter, pulsating in rhythm with the whispers in my head. Its mouth was curled into a small, knowing smile. "I'm part of you now," it said, the words sliding into my mind like a knife. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure in the window didn't move, didn't mimic my panic. It just stood there, watching me with that eerie calm. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The smile widened. "I already have what I want. You." The kitchen spun around me, the shadows twisting and stretching as the whispers grew louder. Memories that weren't mine flashed in my mind. Cold labs, strange symbols etched into metal walls, the faces of people I didn't recognize but somehow knew. They were terrified, running, hiding, trying to contain something they didn't understand. And I was that something now. The whispers turned into words, clear and commanding. "Accept it." I dropped the wrench, my knees buckling under the weight of the voice. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was everywhere. The walls seemed to pulse with it, the shadows crawling closer, reaching for me. "No," I whispered. "I didn't ask for this." "You didn't have to," the voice replied. "You were chosen." The room was suffocating now, the air thick with an energy I couldn't see but could feel in every inch of my body. The lights flickered, the shadows closing in until the kitchen dissolved into darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The silence was deafening, the air was still. The lights came back on and I was alone. The reflection in the window was just me, no glow, no smile, nothing. For a moment, I thought it was over, but then I felt it. A surge of energy rippled through me, sharp and cold, like ice water flooding my veins. My vision blurred, the world tilting as my body seemed to move on its own. My hands trembled, but not from fear. They were steadying themselves, gripping the countertop like they were preparing for something. The whispers returned, softer now, almost gentle. "It's time." I tried to fight it, to resist whatever was happening, but it was like wrestling a tidal wave. My body wasn't mine anymore. It moved with a purpose I didn't understand, pulling open the drawer where I kept my car keys. "No," I said, my voice weak. "I'm not doing this." But I was. My feet carried me to the door, my hand unlocking it with a precision that wasn't mine. The whispers grew louder as I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The car was parked where I'd left it, but it looked different now. The faint green glow I'd seen in the back seat was seeping through the windows, pulsing like a heartbeat. I climbed in, my movements mechanical, and started the engine. The road ahead stretched into darkness, but I didn't need directions. I knew where I was going. The whispers guided me, filling my mind with flashes of a place I'd never been but somehow recognized. A clearing deep in the woods, a place where it had begun and where it would end. As I drove, the whispers shifted, turning into something colder, more deliberate. Not commands, instructions. They weren't just guiding me, they were preparing me. When I reached the clearing, the car stopped on its own. The engine cut out, the lights flickering before plunging me into darkness. The whispers faded, replaced by a deep, guttural growl that sent a chill through my body. And then I saw it. The creature from the forest was waiting for me, its form towering over the trees. But it wasn't alone. The shadows moved around it, shapes taking form, others like it, all glowing faintly with that same green light. "You're ready," the voice said, no longer mocking, but certain. "It's time to bring them back." I didn't understand what it meant, but I didn't have to. The glow in my eyes burned brighter, and for the first time, I didn't fight it. The fear was gone, replaced by something else, something stronger. Acceptance. The last thing I remember is stepping out of the car, the green light swallowing me whole. I don't know what I've become, or what they've turned me into. All I know is that it isn't over. It's just beginning. I paid for a dark web app that claims to control your fears. Now, my worst fears are real. A couple of months ago, I was in a bad place. My anxiety was at an all-time high, and sleep felt like a distant memory. Every night, my brain would churn out every possible worst-case scenario, trapping me in this endless loop of what-ifs. I tried everything, meditation apps, therapy, even a few prescriptions, but nothing stuck. That's when I made the mistake of venturing onto the dark web. It wasn't the first time I'd been there. Mostly, I'd browse out of curiosity, never buying anything, just poking around to see what all the fuss was about. But this time, I wasn't just aimlessly scrolling, I was desperate, and desperate people make terrible decisions. I found the app on a forum thread titled "Rewire Your Mind, No Fear, No Limits." At first, I thought it was a joke. The post was filled with over-the-top testimonials from people claiming it had cured their phobias, freed them from anxiety, or made them fearless. It sounded ridiculous, but what hooked me was a single line buried in the comments. The app doesn't erase your fears, it makes you face them, literally. It was cryptic, sure, but something about it stuck with me. I clicked the link. The website was bare bones, just a black screen with white text. What if your fears could no longer control you? Download our app and take back your mind. There was no company name, no contact info, just a single button that read "Purchase Access." It was $150 in Bitcoin. I hesitated. It was sketchy, obviously. But the idea of finally breaking free from my anxiety was tempting. After a long internal debate, I bit the bullet. I clicked the button, transferred the Bitcoin, and within seconds I received a download link and an activation code. The app was called Fear Cuttrell, with a sleek black and red logo that looked surprisingly polished for something off the dark web. When I opened it, the interface was simple, a single question on the screen. What are you afraid of? Below it was a text box, waiting for me to type. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It felt stupid, like some edgy self-help gimmick, but I typed out my first fear anyway. Being alone in the dark. The screen blinked and a new message appeared. Facing your fear in 3, 2, 1... Then nothing happened. The app closed itself and I was left staring at my phone, feeling both embarrassed and ripped off. I muttered something about scammers and went to bed, trying to forget the whole thing. I woke up at 3:13 a.m. to the sound of my phone vibrating. The screen lit up with a notification from Fear Cetrel. Your fear is ready. I sat up, groggy and confused, and swiped the notification. The app opened, but the text box was gone. Instead, the screen showed a live feed of my bedroom, pitch black, except for the faint outline of my bed. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't filming myself. My phone didn't have any cameras pointing in that direction. But the feed was real. I could see myself sitting up in bed, holding my phone, the blue light reflecting off my face. And then something moved in the corner of the screen. It was subtle at first, a flicker in the darkness near my closet. I thought maybe it was a glitch, or my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But as I watched, the flicker grew into a shadow, something tall and hunched, its movements jerky and unnatural. The fear hit me like a freight train. My mind scrambled for explanations. Someone had broken in, or this was some kind of elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew neither was true. This felt different, more personal. I looked up from the phone, staring into the darkness of my room, but I couldn't see anything. It was too dark. My fingers fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, but when the light clicked on, the room was empty. I stared at the app again, hoping the feed would be gone, but it wasn't. The shadow figure was still there, standing in the same spot, but now its head was turned toward the camera. Toward me. The screen glitched, and a new message appeared. You must face it. I don't know what possessed me to move, but I did. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was the primal need to prove to myself that this wasn't real. I got up, clutching my phone like a lifeline, and walked toward the closet. The app's live feed showed me inching closer to the spot where the shadow stood. But in real life, there was nothing there, just an empty corner. I opened the closet door, half expecting something to lunge at me, but it was empty too. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the app was just some creepy AR trick designed to mess with people's heads. I was ready to delete it and move on with my life. That's when the whispering started. It was faint at first, like a breath against my ear. I spun around, expecting to see someone, but the room was still empty. The live feed on my phone glitched again, and the shadow figure reappeared, this time standing right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My entire body locked up as the whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't understand. The figure on the screen tilted its head, its shadowy hand reaching toward my shoulder. Then the phone vibrated and a new message appeared. Congratulations. You have faced your fear. Next? The figure disappeared, and the app closed itself. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. My bedroom was quiet again, no shadows, no whispers. But the relief didn't last. I knew I had crossed a line, opened a door I couldn't close, and the worst part? The app was still there, waiting. The next morning, everything felt off. I couldn't shake the memory of what had happened the night before, even as I tried to convince myself it was a weird dream or some kind of sleep paralysis episode. But when I picked up my phone, the app was still there, its red and black logo staring back at me like it was daring me to open it. I didn't delete it. I should have, but part of me was too curious, or too stupid, to let it go. Instead, I spent the day obsessively Googling everything I could about Fear Cetrel, the forum where I'd found it, even the dark web link I'd used. Nothing. It was like the app didn't exist. By the time night rolled around, I was jumpy. Every creak in my apartment, every flicker of the lights sent a jolt through me. I locked all the doors, left every light on, and even shoved a chair under the doorknob of my bedroom. It felt ridiculous, but after what I'd experienced, I wasn't taking any chances. At around 11 p.m., the The notification came again. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with the now familiar message, "What are you afraid of?" I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it, to shove the phone in a drawer and pretend it wasn't there. But then I thought about the shadow figure, the way it had disappeared after the app said I'd faced it. Maybe that was it. Maybe I'd beaten the app, proven I wasn't afraid anymore. I opened the app. The same blank text box appeared, waiting for me to type. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. I wasn't stupid enough to pick something dangerous like drowning or fire. So I typed the first thing that came to mind. Spiders. I figured it was safe. Spiders were creepy, sure, but they were small, manageable. I could handle a couple of bugs if it meant proving to myself that this app was just some elaborate joke. The app responded instantly, facing your fear in 3, 2, 1... This time, the app didn't close. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered to life with a live feed of my living room. The camera was angled toward the couch, the cushions rumpled from where I'd been sitting earlier. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but then I saw it, something small and quick scuttling across the floor. I squinted at the screen, trying to make it out. It was a spider, just like I'd expected. And then there was another, and another. Within seconds, the feed showed dozens of them crawling out from beneath the couch, their legs skittering across the hardwood floor in unison. My stomach turned as they began to spread, climbing the walls, swarming the coffee table. I bolted out of bed and into the hallway, my phone clutched in my hand. The living room was just around the corner. I could hear a faint scratching sound, like tiny claws scraping against wood. My brain screamed at me to stay put, but I had to see for myself. When I stepped into the living room, it was empty. No spiders, no movement, just the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through me. The app was messing with me. That had to be it. But when I glanced at my phone, the live feed was still running. The spiders were still there, crawling over the walls, the furniture, and now, toward the hallway where I was standing. I stared at the screen in disbelief. There was nothing in front of me, but on the phone, the swarm was growing closer, their legs clicking against the floor. And then, as I watched, one of them stopped, reared up on its back legs, and seemed to look at the camera. At me. The scratching sound started again, louder this time. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, where a single spider was perched on the wall. It was huge, easily the size of my hand, its body shiny and black. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding, but the spider didn't move. It just sat there, watching. Then, as if on cue, more spiders began to emerge. They crawled out from the shadows, from under the furniture, from cracks in the walls. I bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door shut and shoving the chair back under the doorknob. My phone buzzed again, and I almost didn't want to look. But curiosity, or fear, got the better of me. The app had sent another message. You must face it. No, I whispered, shaking my head. I'm done. I'm not playing your game. The app buzzed again, more insistent this time. You must face it. For the next hour, I sat there, clutching the flashlight from my nightstand and listening to the scratching sounds outside my door. They came in waves, sometimes faint, sometimes loud enough to make my skin crawl. I kept checking my phone, but the live feed was gone, replaced by a blank screen with a single message. You cannot hide forever. I wanted to delete the app, to throw my phone out the window and pretend none of this was real. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. The fear wasn't just in the app anymore. It was here, in my apartment, in the walls, in my mind. Eventually, the scratching stopped. The silence was worse. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. I crept into the living room, my flashlight sweeping across the floor. There were no spiders, no webs, just the same empty space as before. But something was different. The air felt heavier, like the entire room was holding its breath. And then I saw it. In the corner of the ceiling, just above the couch, was a massive, pulsating web. It was faint, almost invisible in the dim light, but it stretched across the entire corner, its strands shimmering like silk. And in the center of the web sat the same huge black spider I'd seen earlier. Only now it wasn't alone. Dozens of smaller spiders surrounded it, their legs twitching in unison. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking, as the giant spider raised one leg and pointed directly at me. The app buzzed one last time. "Congratulations, you have faced your fear. Next?" The web and its occupants vanished, just like the shadow figure had the night before. But this time, the relief didn't come. Because I realized something horrifying. The spiders might have been gone, but their scratches, their whispers, I could still hear them. I didn't sleep that night. After the spiders disappeared, if they even disappeared, I sat in the middle of my bed with every light in my apartment on, clutching my phone like it was some kind of shield. The app's logo glared back at me, its red and black colors almost pulsing, like it was alive. I wanted to delete it. I even went as far as holding down the icon until the little X popped up, but my finger froze. What if that made things worse? What if deleting the app didn't stop whatever was happening, but only pissed it off? I wasn't ready to find out. The next morning, the world felt wrong. The light streaming through my windows was too bright, the air too still. Every noise, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, made me flinch. I couldn't stop hearing the scratching sounds, faint and distant, as if they were hiding just beneath the surface of reality. I forced myself to go about my day, hoping routine would drown out the unease. Work, groceries, even a short walk around the block. It all felt hollow, like I was going through the motions of someone else's life. But everywhere I went, I felt it. The weight of eyes on my back, the electric hum of being watched. And every time I turned around, nothing was there. The next notification came at 8:17 p.m. on the dot. I was in the middle of reheating leftovers, the microwave humming quietly in the background, when my phone buzzed. My stomach dropped as I saw the now familiar message. "What are you afraid of?" This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the app, my fingers trembling as I stared at the blank text box. My mind raced, but I couldn't bring myself to type anything. What if I chose something worse than spiders? What if this was the moment everything spiraled out of control? But then the app buzzed again, more insistently. "Enter your fear." I typed the first thing that came to mind, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Losing control. The app responded immediately. "Facing your fear in 3, 2, 1... At first, nothing happened. The app didn't show a live feed this time, didn't glitch or flicker. It just closed itself, leaving me staring at my home screen. Relief washed over me for a split second. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe I'd finally broken it. And then I noticed the silence. The microwave had stopped humming. The clock on the wall was frozen, its second hand stuck between ticks. Even the faint buzz of electricity that always seemed to fill the air was gone. It was like the entire world had paused. And then my phone buzzed. The screen didn't light up with a notification this time. Instead, the camera turned on by itself, showing my face in real time. But the person staring back at me wasn't right. My reflection blinked a half-second too late, its eyes trailing just behind mine. Its expression was off too, like it was mimicking my movements rather than making them. I tilted my head, and it tilted the other way. I opened my mouth to speak, and it smiled instead. The smile froze me. It wasn't just a smile, it was malicious, predatory, like it knew something I didn't. I tried to close the app, to throw the phone across the room, but my body wouldn't respond. I could feel my muscles tensing, my fingers gripping the phone tighter, but it wasn't me. Something else was in control. The reflection leaned closer, filling the screen, its smile stretching wider than humanly possible. Its lips moved, but the voice didn't come from the phone. It came from everywhere at once. "You gave me the wheel," it said. "Let's see where we go." I blacked out. When I came to, I was sitting in my living room, the TV blaring static. My hands were raw and red, the skin scraped as if I'd been clawing at something, but I couldn't remember what. My phone was on the coffee table, the app still open. The screen now showed a list of options. Next fear? I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall and never look at it again, but I couldn't. My curiosity, no, my need to understand, kept pulling me back in. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and stared at the list. It was populated with fears I hadn't typed, things I hadn't even thought about. Being buried alive, drowning, betrayal. "Your own mind!" The last one made my blood run cold. How did the app know? How could it know? I tapped it before I could stop myself, and the screen went black. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a single line of text appeared. "It's already inside." I don't know how long I sat there staring at those words. I could feel it now, this creeping, invasive presence in the back of my mind. It wasn't loud or forceful. It was subtle, patient, like it was waiting for the right moment to take over completely. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was all in my head. But when I glanced at my reflection in the darkened TV screen, I saw it again, that twisted smile, that knowing look. And this time, it wasn't waiting for me to notice. It moved on its own, its mouth forming words I couldn't hear. The next few days were a blur. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I started losing time, waking up in places I didn't remember going, with scratches and bruises I couldn't explain. My phone kept buzzing with notifications from the app, but I stopped opening them. The fears didn't stop, though. They didn't need the app anymore. They were everywhere now, slipping into every shadow, every corner of my mind. And the worst part? The voice, the one from the reflection, started speaking directly to me. "You can't control this," it whispered, as I lay in bed one night, staring at the ceiling. "You can't control me." I tried deleting the app again. This time, the icon didn't even wiggle. It just stayed there, unmoving, like it was part of the phone itself. I even factory reset the device, but when it restarted, FEARCTRL was the first thing I saw. The final notification came at 3:33 a.m. It was simple, just a single line of text. "The only way out is to finish." By the time the 3:33 a.m. notification came through, I was barely holding it together. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, the text pulsing faintly as if mocking me. "The only way out is to finish." What did that even mean? Finish what? The app didn't explain, of course, it never did. But I knew deep down that ignoring it wouldn't help. Every time I tried to run, it followed me. No, it controlled me. And the longer I avoided it, the stronger its hold seemed to get. I decided I had to fight back. If this thing wanted me to play its game, then fine, I'd find a way to break the rules. The first thing I did was try to disconnect. I turned off my phone, threw it in a drawer, and left my apartment without it. I spent the morning at a coffee shop downtown, trying to ground myself in normalcy. People bustled around me, sipping lattes and chatting like the world hadn't been turned upside down. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. But then I noticed it. A man sitting at the far end of the cafe, staring at me over the rim of his coffee cup. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, unblinking. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me when I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. He just kept watching. I tried to ignore him, chalking it up to paranoia. But then I glanced at my watch and froze. The second hand wasn't moving. The entire cafe had gone silent. The baristas behind the counter were frozen mid-motion, steam from the espresso machine hanging unnaturally in the air. And the man who'd been watching me? He stood up, his movements slow and jerky, like a puppet on tangled strings. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His blank expression and dead eyes said enough. I ran out of the cafe, my heart pounding. The streets outside were empty, eerily quiet despite it being mid-morning. I could hear my footsteps echoing against the pavement, each step accompanied by a faint, familiar sound, tapping. I didn't stop running until I was back at my apartment. The drawer where I'd left my phone was open, and the device was lying face up on the floor, the screen lit with another notification. Running won't help. Next fear? I wanted to smash it, to throw it out the window and pretend none of this was happening, but I knew it wouldn't work. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just an app. It was something else, something alive. Breaking the phone wouldn't stop it. Desperation made me bold. I picked up the phone and opened FEARCTRL. This time, instead of a text box, the screen showed a mirror image of me, my reflection, just like before. But something was different. My reflection wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was smiling again. "You can't win," it said, its voice distorted and layered, like 1,000 versions of me speaking at once. "But you can lose on your terms." "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The reflection tilted its head, its smile widening. "Everything." The reflection faded, replaced by a list of new fears. These weren't generic phobias like spiders or heights. They were specific, tailored, personal. Being forgotten, losing yourself, becoming the monster. Each one felt like a knife twisting in my gut. The app wasn't just pulling random fears out of a hat. It was inside my head, digging up the things I tried hardest to bury. The tapping started again, louder this time, coming from every direction. I clutched the phone, my pulse racing, as the screen flickered to life with a live feed. This time, it showed my apartment, not a distorted version or a glitchy AR overlay, but my actual apartment, exactly as it was now. And there, standing in the doorway to my bedroom, was me. The figure looked just like me, but its eyes were wrong. They were dark, hollow pits, and its smile was so wide it seemed to split its face in half. It raised a hand, beckoning silently, as if daring me to come closer. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were glued to the floor. The phone buzzed, and a new message appeared. "Finish it." I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I stepped forward. My mind screamed at me to run, to fight, but my body didn't listen. I walked toward the doorway, toward the figure that looked like me but wasn't. As I got closer, the air grew colder, thicker. It felt like walking through water, each step harder than the last. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just watched as I approached. When I was only a foot away, it spoke. Its voice was calm, almost gentle, but layered with something dark and infinite. "You've already lost," it said. "You just don't know it yet." It raised a hand and placed it on my chest. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my bones, and the world around me blurred. My vision darkened, and for a moment I thought I was going to pass out. But instead, I woke up. I was lying on the floor of my apartment, the phone still clutched in my hand. The screen was blank, the app gone. Everything was quiet, too quiet. At first, I thought it was over, but then I looked in the mirror and saw it. My reflection didn't move. It just smiled. When I saw my reflection in the mirror, smiling while I stood frozen in terror, I knew the app hadn't left. The phone might have wiped it, but its hold on me was stronger than ever. I stared at my reflection, willing it to move, to blink, to do anything that made it feel human again. It didn't. It just smiled wider. I backed away from the mirror, my pulse racing, and the reflection followed. Not physically, it stayed in the mirror, but it felt like it was following me. Its gaze bore into me, unblinking, unrelenting. I tried covering the mirror with a towel, but I could still feel it, the weight of its attention pressing against my chest. That night, I heard the tapping again. It came from inside the walls, beneath the floor, behind my locked doors. No matter where I went, it followed, growing louder with each passing hour. I shoved my earbuds in, blasted music to drown it out, but it didn't help. By 2 a.m. the whispers started. This time, they weren't incoherent murmurs. They were voices, my voice, repeating my thoughts back to me, twisted and wrong. "You're losing control," it whispered. "You can't stop it. You're already gone." By morning, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The world felt distant, hazy, like I was watching it from behind a glass pane. My reflection was everywhere, windows, puddles, even in the blank screen of my TV. It was always there, always smiling. I tried leaving the apartment, but the air outside felt wrong. The sun was too bright, the shadows too sharp. People passed me on the street, their faces blurry, their voices muffled, like I was underwater. I stumbled back inside, gasping for air, and locked the door behind me. The phone was on the counter when I returned, though I could have sworn I'd left it in a drawer. Its screen was on, glowing faintly, and a new message was waiting. "You cannot escape yourself." I wanted to smash it, to end whatever this was, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the faint, nagging thought that breaking the phone wouldn't end the nightmare. It would only make it worse. Instead, I picked it up and opened the message. The app was back. The interface was different now, stripped down to a single black screen with a countdown timer in the center. 0, 0, 0, 5, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 4, 9, 9, 0, 0, 0, 4, 8, 8. It was counting down. To what? I didn't know, but the panic set in immediately. I pressed every button, swiped every direction, but nothing stopped it. The screen stayed locked on the timer, ticking down second by second. The tapping started again, louder than ever. It was no longer confined to the walls. It was in the room with me. I turned, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. Just the empty apartment and the growing sense that I wasn't alone. 00345. The whispers came back, this time so loud they drowned out my thoughts. They weren't just in my head, they were everywhere, filling the air like a chorus of voices all saying the same thing. "You are the fear." The lights in the apartment flickered, then went out completely. My phone was the only source of light now, its screen casting an eerie glow as the timer ticked down. I backed into the corner, clutching it like a lifeline, as the tapping grew into pounding, shaking the walls around me. Then the timer hit 00100. The pounding stopped. The whispers fell silent. The room was still. And then a final message appeared on the screen. "Face it." The air grew cold and the shadows in the room began to shift. They pooled together in the center of the floor, rising like smoke, forming a shape. It was me. Or at least, it looked like me. Same height, same build. But its eyes were hollow, its movements unnatural, and that smile, that damn smile. It stepped closer, its shadowy form flickering like static. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I was frozen in place, forced to watch as it came closer, its blank eyes locking onto mine. "You asked for this," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You gave me the fear, now it's yours." The figure raised a hand and the shadows around it surged forward, wrapping around me like smoke. They weren't cold like I'd expected. They were suffocating, pressing against me, pulling me down. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. All I could hear was the voice, repeating the same words over and over. "You are the fear. You are the fear." When the darkness finally lifted, I was back in my apartment. The phone was gone. The tapping was gone. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I stumbled to the bathroom, desperate to see if it was over. My reflection stared back at me, and for the first time in days, it moved with me. I let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding my chest. But then it stopped. I froze, my hand still mid-motion, as my reflection stayed perfectly still. Slowly, it tilted its head, its eyes narrowing as its lips curled into a smile. My stomach dropped as it mouthed a single word. Next, the lights flickered and the tapping started again. It's been a week since then, and the app hasn't come back. I haven't seen any more notifications, haven't heard the whispers. But the fear is still here, lingering in the corners, watching, waiting. And the worst part? When I look in the mirror, sometimes I smile back. I was offered a job to keep watch over a government project. The project can read my thoughts. I was desperate for a job. I'd been out of work for months, and my savings were drying up faster than I'd like to admit. I'd scrolled through every job board, sent out what felt like 1,000,000 applications, and still nothing. So when I got an email inviting me to interview for a security role at some unnamed government facility, I didn't think twice about saying yes. The email was vague, no company name, no details about the job, just a time, a location, and a promise of competitive compensation. Normally I'd have ignored it, felt like a phishing scam or something, but I was at the point where I'd take anything. Plus the location was local, and the pay they hinted at was, well, let's just say it was enough to make me overlook the sketchy vibes. The address they sent led me to a nondescript office building on the edge of town. It looked abandoned, no signs, no other cars in the lot. But I figured maybe that was part of the whole government secrecy thing. When I stepped inside, the receptionist was already waiting, a middle-aged guy in a suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "You're early," he said, without looking up from his clipboard. "Take a seat. They'll call you in when they're ready." I sat down in the only chair in the room, the kind of uncomfortable plastic thing you'd find in a high school cafeteria. The minutes dragged by, and just as I started to wonder if this was all some elaborate joke, the receptionist spoke again. "Room 3, down the hall on the left." I walked down the dimly lit hallway, my footsteps echoing against the tile floor. Room 3 was just a plain wooden door with no label. I knocked, and a voice from the other side said, "Come in." The room was even less welcoming than the lobby. No windows, just a table, 2 chairs, and a guy in a lab coat who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He motioned for me to sit down and introduced himself as Dr. Harlan. "Let's cut to the chase," he said, shuffling through a stack of papers. "The job is simple. You'll monitor a secure area, report any anomalies, and follow strict protocol. No questions, no deviations." "Okay," I said, leaning forward. "But what am I actually watching? Like, what's the secure area?" His lips twitched, almost like he was trying not to smile. "You'll be observing a government project, that's all you need to know for now." I raised an eyebrow. "And why me?" "I mean, I don't exactly have experience with whatever this is." He looked up, his gaze sharp. You were selected because you fit the criteria. That's all you need to concern yourself with. Normally, I'd have asked more questions, but something about his tone made me drop it. Instead, I nodded and asked about the pay. When he told me the number, my jaw nearly hit the floor. It was more than double what I'd been making at my last job. I signed the paperwork on the spot. The next day, I showed up at the same building, only this time they led me through a series of locked doors and down a staircase that seemed to go on forever. When we finally reached the bottom, I was standing in a cold, sterile hallway lined with reinforced steel doors. My guide, a silent guy in a black suit, stopped in front of one and handed me a key card. "This is your station," he said, his voice flat. "You'll stay in this room for the duration of your shift. You do not leave, and you do not interact with the project unless absolutely necessary. Understood?" "Yeah, sure," I said, though I didn't really understand anything at all. The room itself was small and bare, just a desk with a monitor and a chair. The monitor showed a live feed of a larger room beyond a thick glass window. The space on the other side was empty, except for a single chair in the center, bolted to the floor. No equipment, no lights, nothing, just the chair. "What exactly am I watching for?" I asked, but my guide didn't answer. He just nodded and closed the door behind him, leaving me alone. I sat down, staring at the screen and the window, waiting for something, anything to happen. Hours passed, and nothing did. At first, I thought the job was a joke. They were paying me a ridiculous amount of money to sit in an empty room and stare at an empty chair. But then things started to change. It began with the feeling of being watched. Not the kind of paranoid unease you get when you're alone, but something sharper, heavier, like a weight pressing on my chest. I looked around the room, but there were no cameras pointed at me, no hidden microphones that I could see, just the monitor and the glass window. Then the whispers started. They were faint at first, just a low murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong, like someone speaking through clenched teeth, angry and desperate. I checked the monitor, but the room on the screen was still empty. "Hello?" I called, half expecting someone to answer. But the whispers stopped as soon as I spoke. For the rest of the shift I sat there, too scared to move. I kept my eyes on the monitor, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But when my guide returned to relieve me, I couldn't help but ask, Is there something in that room?" I asked, pointing to the screen. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave me a look that sent a chill down my spine, a mix of pity and something else, something darker. "Your job is to observe," he said, "not to ask questions." And then he left, locking the door behind him. That night I couldn't sleep. The whispers, the feeling of being watched, it all stayed with me, echoing in my mind. And when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that empty chair, waiting for something, or someone. I went back for my second shift the next day, hoping I'd convince myself that what happened the first night was just nerves or my imagination. But as I descended those endless stairs again, my stomach tightened. There was something unnatural about that place. The air felt heavier the deeper I went, and the cold seeped into my bones like the building itself was alive. When I reached my station, the guide was waiting for me. Same stiff posture, same blank expression. "Any questions before you begin?" he asked. I wanted to ask 1,000 things about the whispers, the chair, the purpose of this whole operation, but his tone made it clear he wasn't interested in answers. So I just shook my head. "Good," he said, handing me the key card and walking away. I stepped into the room, and everything was exactly as I'd left it. The desk, the monitor, the window, looking into the empty room, that damn chair. I sat down, settling in for another night of nothing. Or so I thought. At first, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I stared at the monitor, watching the live feed of the chair. I told myself it was just an object, nothing more, nothing less. But it didn't feel that way. About an hour into the shift, I noticed something odd. The chair wasn't in the same position as before. It was subtle, just a few inches to the left, but enough to make my pulse quicken. Must have been the camera angle, I muttered to myself, trying to sound convincing. But then it moved again. This time, I saw it. Not a lot, just a slight jerk, like someone had bumped into it, but it was enough to make me sit up straight. My first thought was that there was someone in the room, but the feed showed nothing. No one, just the chair, now a little closer to the window. The whispers started up again. They were louder this time, clear enough that I could almost make out the words. It wasn't just one voice, it was a chorus, overlapping and disjointed, angry, pleading, mocking. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside my head. I clenched my fists, trying to block it out, but the whispers only grew louder. And then I heard it, my name. A chill ran down my spine. "No," I whispered. "No way!" The monitor flickered, static, crackling across the screen. When the feed came back, the chair was closer to the glass, much closer. It was facing the window now, tilted slightly like it was looking at me. I jumped out of my chair, backing away from the monitor. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, but no one answered. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the room was deathly silent. Then the chair moved again, dragging itself across the floor with a loud metallic screech. This time, it didn't stop until it was pressed right up against the glass. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor, my mind frozen in disbelief. And then for the first time I saw it. A shadow. Just a flicker at first, faint and indistinct. But it was there. Something was sitting in the chair. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. It wasn't a person. Not really. Its form was hazy, shifting, like smoke trapped in a human shape. 2 pinpricks of light glowed where its eyes should have been, and they were staring straight at me. "Get out!" the voice in my head snarled. This time it wasn't a whisper, it was a command. I bolted for the door, slamming my keycard against the reader. The lock clicked open, and I stumbled into the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The guide was waiting for me at the end of the hall. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Rough night?" he asked, his tone unreadable. "What the hell is that thing?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What's in that room?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me a small black envelope. "Your payment for the week? Same time tomorrow?" I stared at him, my mind racing. I should have said no, walked away, reported the whole thing to someone, anyone. But when I opened the envelope and saw the stack of cash inside, something in me hesitated. "Same time tomorrow," I muttered, shoving the envelope into my pocket. He nodded, his lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. "Good. The project likes you." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow in the chair, those glowing eyes burning into my soul. But no matter how terrified I was, one thought kept running through my mind. What did he mean, the project likes me? I showed up for my 3rd shift because I didn't know what else to do. Fear and logic told me to quit, but the money, the ridiculous amount of money, kept pulling me back. I told myself that if I could last just one more night, I'd save enough to walk away and never look back. The staircase seemed longer that night, each step echoing like a warning. When I reached my station, The guide wasn't waiting for me this time. Just the empty hallway and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. I swiped my key card and stepped into the room, bracing myself for whatever came next. The chair was back in its original spot, centered perfectly in the room. The monitor showed the same live feed, nothing out of the ordinary. For the first hour, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The air felt heavier than usual, the silence pressing against my ears like static. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, waiting for the chair to move, for the whispers to start. But nothing happened. Then the monitor flickered. Just once, a brief crackle of static, but enough to make me sit up straight. When the feed stabilized, the room was no longer empty. The shadow was there. It wasn't in the chair this time. It was standing, tall and unnaturally thin, its edges shimmering like heat waves. Those glowing pinpricks of light where its eyes should have been were fixed directly on the camera. On me. I leaned back, my pulse racing. The shadow didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. I could feel it watching me, studying me, like it was trying to pull something out of my mind. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the room with an eerie, vibrating hum. "Why are you here?" the voice in my head demanded. I froze, unsure if I was imagining it. I don't know," I whispered aloud, my voice trembling. "You do," it snarled. "Tell me." The monitor flickered again, and suddenly the screen wasn't showing the room anymore. It was showing me. The live feed was from my station. The camera was angled from the corner of the ceiling, capturing me sitting in the chair, my face pale and panicked. My stomach dropped as I stared at myself in real time. I could even see the shadow behind me on the screen, standing just outside the range of the window. I spun around, but the room was empty. No shadow, no glowing eyes, just the monitor and the cold, lifeless walls. But when I turned back to the screen, the shadow was still there, closer now, its long, spindly arms reaching toward me. "Stop," I said, my voice cracking. "Whatever this is, stop it." The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a deafening roar. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The noise wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside my head. And then everything went quiet. The silence was almost worse. It felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. The shadow on the screen tilted its head, those glowing eyes narrowing. "I know you," it said, the voice clear and sharp in my mind. "No, you don't," I stammered. "You don't know anything about me." It laughed, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "I know your thoughts, your fears, your past." The screen changed again, showing images that made my blood run cold, memories, moments from my life that no one else should have known about. The time I lied to my best friend in middle school. The night I drove home drunk and swore I'd never do it again. The day I sat in my car outside my parents' house, too ashamed to go inside after losing my job. "How?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "How do you know this?" "I am inside you," the shadow said. "You opened the door, and now I see everything." I stumbled back, my legs nearly giving out. "I didn't open anything," I said, panic rising in my chest. "I'm just doing my job." "You agreed," it hissed. "You invited me, and now you belong to me." The monitor flickered again, the feed returning to the empty room. The chair was back in its original position, perfectly still. But I knew better now. It wasn't just a chair. It was a conduit, a bridge between something that shouldn't exist and the world we know. The whispers faded, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to pulse through the room. I tried to breathe, to ground myself, but every part of me felt untethered, like I was floating in a void. The door behind me creaked open and I spun around, expecting to see the guide. But no one was there. Just the dark, empty hallway stretching endlessly in both directions. My shift wasn't over, but I couldn't stay. Grabbing my keycard, I bolted from the room, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the silence. I didn't stop running until I reached the staircase, my chest heaving as I climbed the steps 2 at a time. When I finally burst into the lobby, the receptionist looked up from his clipboard, his expression unchanged. "Leaving early?" he asked, his tone casual. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not coming back." He shrugged, as if he'd heard it all before. "Suit yourself," he said. "But the project won't like that." I didn't respond. I didn't look back. I just walked out into the cold night air, my heart pounding, the whispers still faintly echoing in my mind. That night, I locked every door and window in my apartment. I turned off all the lights and sat in the corner of my bedroom, gripping a kitchen knife like it would somehow protect me. But even in the dark, I couldn't escape. When I closed my eyes, I saw it. The shadow, the glowing eyes, the chair. And when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of the project, waiting for me. I didn't quit. Not really. The next morning, I told myself it was over, that I'd never go back. But by the afternoon, the fear had started to mix with something else. Curiosity. What had I agreed to? What was the project? And why did it feel like walking away wouldn't change anything? I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with me. That it wasn't done with me. That night, I stayed home, ignoring the phone when it buzzed with an unknown number. I barricaded my door and sat on the couch with all the lights on, the TV playing softly in the background to drown out the silence. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow, about its voice inside my head. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I froze, the remote slipping from my hand. No one ever knocked at this hour. I didn't even have neighbors close enough for it to be some friendly misunderstanding. The sound was heavy, each knock reverberating through the room like a countdown. I didn't move, I barely breathed. For a moment, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then the knocks came again. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling as I edged toward the door. I didn't say anything, didn't ask who it was. I just peeked through the peephole, expecting to see, I don't even know, a delivery guy, a lost stranger. But there was no one there. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I backed away from the door, grabbing the kitchen knife from the counter, and tried to convince myself it was just a prank. Someone messing with me, that's all it had to be. And then my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with another unknown number. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't stop myself from looking. "You can't ignore us." I stared at the message, my hand gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. Before I could respond or think, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a link. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at me to delete the message and throw the phone as far away as possible. But my thumb moved on its own, tapping the link like I wasn't in control of my own body. The browser opened to a live feed, the same feed I'd been watching during my shifts, showing the sterile room with the chair in the center. At first, it looked empty. The chair was perfectly still, the lights casting sharp shadows against the concrete walls. Then the camera panned to the window, the one that separated my observation room from the project's chamber. My blood ran cold as I realized the live feed wasn't showing the project's room anymore, it was showing mine. The camera zoomed in on the desk, the chair I'd been sitting in during my shifts. The chat box on the screen came alive, comments flooding in faster than I could read. He's watching. He thinks he can run. The project never lets go. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the knife. "No," I whispered. "This isn't real." But it was. The screen flickered and the feed cut to another angle, my apartment. The camera was outside my window, focused on me standing in the middle of the room, knife in hand. The knocks came again, louder this time. I whipped around, staring at the door like it might burst open. My phone buzzed one more time and I forced myself to look. "Let us in." "No!" I shouted, backing away. "Leave me alone!" The silence that followed was suffocating. For a moment I thought they'd gone. Then, slowly, the lights in my apartment started to flicker. One by one the bulbs popped, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from my phone, still displaying the live feed of my apartment. The camera zoomed closer, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the angle had changed. It was no longer outside my window, it was inside. The chat exploded with messages. "He's trapped now." Can't wait to see what happens next. The project loves him. I dropped the phone, my chest tightening as I backed into the corner of the room. The darkness seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, and I felt it before I saw it. The shadow. It slid across the walls, stretching and twisting, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It didn't speak this time. It didn't need to. The message was clear. There was no escape. The whispers started again, louder than ever, overlapping into a chaotic, deafening roar. My thoughts felt heavy, sluggish, like they weren't my own anymore. Images flashed through my mind, memories I hadn't thought of in years, fears I'd buried deep. The shadow was inside me, pulling everything to the surface, feeding on my panic. And then it stopped. The room fell silent. The shadow stood motionless, its form solidifying into something almost human. Its glowing eyes dimmed, and a single word echoed in my mind, clear and cold. Tomorrow. The lights flickered back on and the shadow was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner, gripping the knife, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. When dawn finally came, I knew what I had to do. I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have a choice. Whatever the project was, it wasn't finished with me yet. I didn't want to go back, but the alternative felt worse. If I stayed home, I knew the shadow would find me again. It had already proven it could. And as much as the thought of returning to that underground labyrinth terrified me, at least there were walls there, doors, rules. Maybe, just maybe, I'd figure out what the hell was happening. The guide was waiting for me when I arrived, just like nothing had changed. He didn't mention my absence the night before or the way I'd left without finishing my shift. He just handed me the key card and motioned toward the stairs. "Same station," he said. I hesitated. "What is the project?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What does it want from me?" His expression didn't change. "Your questions don't matter. Only your compliance does." I wanted to scream at him, shake him, demand answers, but his cold, unflinching stare told me it was useless. With shaking hands, I took the keycard and started down the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air growing colder and more oppressive the deeper I went. When I reached my station, I paused at the door, my heart pounding. I knew the shadow was waiting. I could feel it. The room looked the same as always, cold, sterile, lifeless. The monitor showed the usual feed of the project's chamber, the chair sitting in its usual spot. But the moment I sat down, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt electric, charged with something I couldn't see, but could feel pressing against my skin. The monitor flickered, and the chair wasn't empty anymore. The shadow was sitting in it. Its form was more solid this time, its limbs unnaturally long and its head tilted at an impossible angle. Those glowing pinpricks of light that served as its eyes stared directly at the camera, directly at me. "You came back," it said, its voice slithering into my mind. "Good." "I didn't have a choice," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" It tilted its head further, the motion slow and deliberate. "To understand you, to see what makes you break." "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The monitor changed, the feed shifting to images that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't showing the project's chamber anymore. It was showing my life, my childhood home, my high school, the diner I used to work at, my apartment. Each scene flickered past like a slideshow, every detail painfully accurate. "This is what you are," the shadow said. "A collection of places, memories, fears, so fragile." "Stop it," I said, louder this time. "You can't do this. You can't." The feed froze on an image of my mother. She was smiling, sitting on the porch of the house I grew up in. The sight of her hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd been gone for years, but seeing her again, so alive, so real, made my chest tighten. "You loved her," the shadow said, its voice dripping with mockery. "She kept you whole, and when she left, so did you." "Shut up!" I shouted, slamming my fists on the desk. "You don't know anything about me." It laughed, a low, guttural sound that echoed in my skull. "I know everything. You gave me access when you agreed to watch." The monitor flickered again, and the feed returned to the project's chamber. The shadow stood up from the chair, its form stretching to fill the screen. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever, and the room seemed to pulse with each one. "You belong to me now," it said. "You will break. They always do." The lights in the room flickered, and for a moment the shadow was no longer on the screen. It was behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were all I could hear. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and I felt like I was being pulled apart, piece by piece. Then everything stopped. The monitor went black, the whispers faded, and the room was silent. I sat there, gasping for breath, my body shaking. I thought it was over. I thought I was free. But then the monitor turned back on. The camera wasn't showing the project's chamber anymore. It wasn't showing my apartment or my memories. It was showing me. I was sitting in the chair, not in the observation room. In the chair, the one in the project's chamber. My face was pale, my eyes wide with terror, and the shadow stood behind me, its long fingers resting on my shoulders like a puppeteer. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not real. That's not me." But it was. The screen didn't lie. The door behind me creaked open and the guide stepped in, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he said. "For what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing the shadow standing in the hallway, its glowing eyes locked on me. "You agreed," the shadow said, its voice filling the room. "You are the project now." Before I could scream, everything went dark.